All right, today we're jumping into the story of one of history's most, well, complicated figures. We're talking about the Australian outlaw Ned Kelly.
So let's start with the big question, the one that's right at the heart of this whole thing. Could a man be a cold-blooded killer and a hero at the same time? I mean, Kelly was a notorious thief. He killed policemen. But for so many people, he was this symbol of resistance, a hero. How does that even happen?
And when you think of Ned Kelly, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For most people, it's this, his homemade suit of iron armor. It's the thing that made him seem, well, more than human. A legend literally forged in iron.
Okay, so to really get this, we're actually going to start at the end. Let's go right to the climax, this incredible, dramatic showdown called the Siege of Glenrowan. Picture this. Police have a small inn completely surrounded. Ned Kelly and his gang are trapped inside after a massive firefight. The sun's coming up, the police are expecting them to surrender, but what they get instead is something nobody could have predicted.
Suddenly, out of the morning mist and the gunpowder smoke, this figure emerges. It's a man, but he's covered in metal. You can hear bullets literally sparking and ricocheting off his chest as he just walks towards the police, firing his revolver. Can you imagine seeing that? It must have been absolutely terrifying, like a ghost or some kind of iron monster. And that was him. That was Ned Kelly, making his last stand.
So, you gotta ask, right? How on earth does it come to this? How does a man end up wearing a homemade suit of armor in a shootout with dozens of cops? Well, to understand the armor, we have to rewind. We have to understand the man, and just as important, the world that made him who he was. You see, you really can't separate Ned Kelly's story from the world he lived in, colonial Australia back in the late 1800s. For poor Irish families, like the Kellys, the whole system felt rigged. It felt like it was designed specifically to keep them down.
And this really breaks it down for you. On one side, you've got the authorities. We're talking about a police force that was seen as totally biased and a legal system that let powerful landowners just take land from small farmers. And on the other side, you've got these poor settlers trapped by insane mortgages and debt they could never repay. And if they tried to fight it in court, forget it. They had no real legal recourse.
So for people like the Kellys, the law wasn't a shield, it was a weapon. And it was a weapon used against them by the rich and powerful. You have to understand that feeling, that constant sense of persecution, because that's the key to this whole story. That's what turns a guy from a small-time criminal into a full-blown rebel.
And this is what brings us to the moment that really cemented his legacy. This is where he went from just being a criminal to something more, a revolutionary in the eyes of his people. Because this next part wasn't about stealing money. Oh no. It was about attacking the system itself.
So when the Kelly gang robbed a bank, it wasn't your typical smash and grab, not at all. It was more like theater. First, yeah, they'd take over the bank, but then they'd bring all the townsfolk together, not as hostages, but as an audience. And then came the big finale. They'd go through the bank, find every single mortgage document, every record of debt that was strangling these people, pile them up in the street, and set them on fire.
Just stop and think about the power of that. To the law, he was a bank robber. Simple. But to the people watching their debts literally go up in smoke, he wasn't a thief, he was a savior. With that one single act, he set them free. And that right there is how a criminal becomes a folk hero.
And of course, becoming that famous, that much of a hero to the people, is exactly what brings us back full circle, back to the Glenrowan Inn. His rebellion had made him the most wanted man in the entire country, and the law was closing in for one last final showdown.
That siege was just chaos. The police had the inn surrounded by dawn. Then, around 5 in the morning, Kelly makes his move in the armor, this shocking, surreal sight in the dim morning light. But he wasn't invincible. The police figured out his legs were unprotected and they just aimed for them. By mid-morning, they'd brought the Iron Man down. He was captured. The end for the rest of his gang was even more brutal. The police just set the whole inn on fire.
Let's talk about that armor for a second. It really tells a story all on its own. It was made from stolen farm equipment, parts of a plow actually, and it weighed 60 pounds. 60! It was this crude, heavy, physical symbol of his defiance. It was his shield against a world he was convinced was out to get him. But in the end, even that wasn't enough.
But that's not where the story ends. Because after he was captured, after they took off that heavy iron armor, they found something underneath, something nobody expected. And it's this final detail that just complicates everything you think you know about this ruthless killer. So there he is, defeated, and underneath 60 pounds of brutal makeshift armor, this symbol of rebellion.
They found a green sash, just a simple silk sash wrapped around his waist, now stained with his blood. So, what was it? Where did it come from?
Well, it turns out that when Ned Kelly was just a kid, he did something incredibly brave. He saved another boy from drowning in a creek. And that sash, it was a gift from the boy's family, a reward for his heroism. And he kept it his whole life. He wore it, hidden under his clothes for all those years, a private reminder of a moment when he was just a hero, even while he was becoming the most wanted man in Australia. So who was this guy really? A killer? Yes. A thief? Absolutely. But he was also a rebel, fighting against what he saw as a corrupt system. For a lot of people, he was a hero, and in the end, he became a legend, a walking, talking contradiction that kind of captures a whole country's struggle with itself.
And that just leaves us with one last question to chew on, doesn't it? The story of Ned Kelly really makes you wonder. When the system itself is broken, when the law feels like it's the enemy, well, who gets to decide who's a hero? Maybe that line between hero and villain isn't quite as clear as we'd like to think.